Chapter 9. Tall Tale. Wally was prepared not to speak to the Malloy girls for the rest of his life if necessary, if it would keep him from getting into any more trouble than he had. Mom was already upset with him and Jake and Josh because of the pie business, and then, when they told their dad that Eddie had gotten bitten by something, Mr. Hatford called the Malloys to find out what, and Coach Malloy told them it was just a sprained thumb. So when he got to school on Monday, Wally took his seat without turning around, got out the spelling list he had been working on over the weekend, and went right to work memorizing bargain, separate, juicy, and argument. He was very surprised, therefore, when Caroline Malloy tapped him on the shoulder. He only half turned. "What do you want?" he asked. "I was just wondering if anyone ever found any bones." "What?" "If anyone ever found a skeleton of an abaguchi. I mean, if anyone did, couldn't scientists study it and find out what kind of animal it is?" Wally could hardly believe his ears. Caroline was asking him? Caroline was going to believe whatever he told her? His mind whirred. Over in the corner, Miss Applebaum was pinning up a list of class helpers for the week, who had lunchroom cleanup, who had blackboard cleanup, who took the volleyballs out to the playground. He turned around a little more. "Well, he doesn't want anyone to know," Wally said. "Who doesn't?" "Mr. Oldacre." "Who's that?" "The man who owns the bookstore. Nobody's supposed to know about the bones, and if I told you, you'd just tell your sisters." "I would not." "Ha! Sure you wouldn't." Nothing happened for a moment or two, and then there was another tap on Wally's shoulder. "What?" He acted annoyed. This time he turned around far enough to see Caroline's face. Her eyes were wide, and she had a sort of earnest look on them. "Tell me, Wally," Caroline begged. "You're nuts. Please? You'd blab the minute you got out of school, and Mr. Oldacre would really be mad because the only other person in town who's supposed to know is my dad, which is the only reason I know." "Well, if only your father is supposed to know, and now you know, he must have blabbed," said Caroline. Wally faced the front of the room again. When he and Caroline were not speaking, she drove him nuts. When he and Caroline were speaking, she drove him nuts. It was hopeless. He couldn't escape. His destiny was to be driven absolutely crazy by Caroline Malloy. The notes of the Star-Spangled Banner sounded over the loudspeaker, and Wally slid from his seat and put his hand over his heart and stood at attention until Miss Applebaum said they could sit. Then the teacher started the spelling test. At least he had until recess to think about what to say next. Wally was thinking. Now that he had told Caroline there was some big secret about the abaguchi, he had to figure out what it was. His mouth had run on faster than his brain could keep up. Why had he brought in Mr. Oldacre? Why, the minute Caroline had asked about bones, had he thought of the bookstore? The only reason Wally could think of was that there was a trap door in the very center of the floor of Oldacre's, because it led to an old storage cellar, and because the floor of the cellar was dirt. It seemed to Wally a perfect place to bury treasure. Treasure, or a dead body, or both. And because he had once helped Mr. Oldacre bring up some boxes from the cellar, and because Caroline had asked about bones, that was probably why he had thought of Mr. Oldacre's cellar. When the bell rang for recess, Miss Applebaum was first out the door to take her attendance sheet to the office, and the others followed her in a line because they were going to divide up into teams and play kickball. Wally loved kickball, and he was hurrying so fast to get out the room that he jerked too hard on his jacket he had stuffed in his desktop and pulled out a box of 64 crayons, spilling them all across the floor. "Rats!" Wally yelled. Not only did he want to make sure he was a first team for kickball, but he wanted to get away from Caroline the Crazy as well. He stopped to pick up every crayon, some of which had rolled as far as 2 rows away. When he got them into the box at last and turned to go out the door, he found Caroline blocking the doorway, with her hands and feet braced tightly against the sides. "Move it," said Wally. "I'm not moving till you tell me the secret of the bones." "What?" "The secret Mr. Oldacre told your father about the abaguchi." Wally's first thought was to push her out of the way, but she was wedged tightly there in the doorframe, arms and legs spread like a big X. It would take more than a little push to loosen her, and if he gave a big push, she'd go sprawling into the hallway, and then he would be in big trouble. "What did Mr. Oldacre tell your dad, Wally? Tell me." There wasn't anything left to do. Wally lowered his voice. "Promise you won't tell?" "Promise." Wally's mind was like a runaway truck barreling down a steep hill without any brakes. "A couple of years ago," he lied, They were digging out more of Oldacre's cellar beneath his store, and somebody found bones. He watched Caroline's feet slide down the door frame. Wally's mind raced on and on. He was a better storyteller than he had thought. Tall tales, that's what he was telling. How could he call something this wild a lie? If Caroline believed him, that was her problem. Whose were they? Caroline breathed. Well, Dad says they weren't bones of any known animal. Mr. Oldacre thinks it could be the skeleton of an Abaguchi, but they don't want people getting upset or staying away from the bookstore or anything, so they just haven't told anyone but Dad. As far as I know, the bones are still there. Once again, he tried to push past Caroline, and once again, she braced her hands and feet against the sides. Just tell me one more thing, Wally. How do I get in Oldacre's cellar? There's a trap door beyond the cashier's counter, but they'd see you if you tried to go down there. Take my word for it, Caroline, and don't try it. Now move. Caroline moved. Thank you very much, Wally, she called after him as he ran headlong out to the playground. Finally, he was free.